So 60 seconds ago, former U.S. President Donald Trump took to his social platform and launched a sharp attack against Canada's dairy industry. In his post, he accused Canada of protecting its farmers behind what he described as massive trade barriers. According to him, American dairy producers are effectively locked out of the Canadian market by a system designed to keep foreign competitors away. Trump went even further. He called Canada's dairy policy unfair, described it as a manipulated market, and claimed that American farmers were being denied opportunities that should exist under a fair North American trade relationship. His strongest words described the system as something close to economic exploitation. But what happened next caught almost everyone off guard. At that exact moment, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney was participating in a parliamentary session in Ottawa. During the debate, one of his aides quietly handed him a printed copy of Trump's post. Carney read it for only a few seconds. Then he placed the paper down and responded. What followed wasn't a heated political argument. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't a diplomatic dodge either. Instead, Carney delivered a calm, fact-driven explanation that turned the entire conversation in a completely different direction. And by the time he finished speaking, many observers said the debate about Canada's dairy policy had fundamentally changed. Before we get into what he said, we need to understand why dairy has become such an explosive topic between the United States and Canada. Because this debate is not really about milk. It's about two completely different ways of running an agricultural economy. Canada has used something called supply management for its dairy industry since the early 1970s. The idea behind it is relatively simple. Protect farmers from the extreme price swings that often happen in global food markets. The system works through three main tools. First, production quotas. These limit how much milk farmers can produce, which prevents massive oversupply. Second, import limits, which control how much foreign dairy can enter the Canadian market. And third, price stabilization, which ensures that farmers receive a price that covers the cost of production. Supporters of the system say it has one clear goal: protecting family farms. Unlike many agricultural industries that experience boom and bust cycles, Canada's dairy sector has remained relatively stable for decades. Many farms are family-owned, passed down through generations, and able to operate without constant financial crises. Critics, however, argue that the system can raise prices for consumers and restrict international trade. And that's exactly where the United States enters the picture. American dairy production operates under a very different model. Overproduction has been a recurring issue in the United States for years. When too much milk enters the market, prices drop dramatically. And when prices fall below the cost of production, farmers can struggle to survive. In fact, the U.S. dairy sector has experienced a significant decline in the number of farms over the past 2 decades. Thousands of smaller operations have disappeared, often replaced by larger, industrial-scale facilities. To help stabilize the industry, the U.S. government provides several forms of support, including insurance programs, income protection mechanisms, and other agricultural assistance programs. So when Trump criticized Canada's dairy protections, he was essentially arguing that American farmers should have greater access to Canadian markets. But when Mark Carney began responding in Parliament, he focused on something different. He started by acknowledging that trade disagreements between allies are normal. Canada and the United States negotiate constantly over issues involving agriculture, energy, manufacturing, and technology. Disputes happen all the time. But then he pointed out something that changed the tone of the conversation. Under the current North American Trade Agreement, known as the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, or USMCA, Canada already allows a certain amount of American dairy products into its market tariff-free. Those limits were negotiated by both countries and agreed upon during the trade deal that replaced NAFTA. Each year, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of American dairy products are exported to Canada through those quotas. In other words, access already exists. If the United States wants those quotas expanded, Carney explained, the proper place to negotiate that change is through trade discussions, not social media posts. Then he addressed another important point. Both countries support their farmers. They simply do it in different ways. Canada's system relies on managing supply and stabilizing prices. The United States, on the other hand, uses a variety of government programs that provide financial protection to farmers when markets collapse. The key takeaway from Carney's response was simple. Neither country operates a completely free agricultural market. Every major agricultural economy in the world protects its farmers in some form. After establishing that context, Carney introduced a comparison that surprised many observers. He talked about outcomes. Over the past 2 decades, Canada's dairy sector has remained relatively stable. Farms still face challenges, but widespread waves of bankruptcies have been rare. In contrast, the United States has seen a dramatic consolidation of its dairy industry. Many smaller farms have closed, while production has become increasingly concentrated in large operations. Carney didn't frame this as criticism of American farmers. Instead, he framed it as evidence that different systems produce different results. Before criticizing another country's approach, he suggested, it might be useful to look at what outcomes each system actually delivers. The statement was delivered calmly, without anger or dramatic rhetoric, but it clearly resonated inside the chamber. Members of Parliament reacted immediately. Some applauded the explanation, while others remained quiet. Outside the chamber, the political reaction was just as interesting. Supporters of Canada's supply management system praised the Prime Minister's response as a clear defense of a policy that has supported rural communities for decades. Farmer organizations said the explanation accurately described how the system works and why it exists. Even some critics of supply management acknowledged that the comparison between the two countries' agricultural systems raised legitimate questions about how fairness in trade disputes should be measured. Meanwhile, officials in Washington responded cautiously. Statements from U.S. trade representatives repeated long-standing concerns about Canadian market barriers and argued that American farmers should have greater opportunities in Canada. But no immediate policy action followed the exchange. And that highlights something important about this entire situation. The debate between Canada and the United States over agriculture has been happening for years. Dairy, steel, pharmaceuticals, lumber. These industries have all been sources of trade tension at different times. What makes this moment stand out is not the disagreement itself. It's the way the disagreement unfolded. Instead of escalating the rhetoric, Carney chose to respond with data, context, and comparisons between the two systems. The message was not that Canada's system is perfect. The message was that trade debates should examine both sides honestly. Because when one country criticizes another's policies, it's important to recognize that almost every major economy uses some form of protection or support in key industries. The bigger question now is what happens next. Will the United States push for new negotiations over dairy access? Will Canada consider changes to its system in future trade discussions? Or will this remain another example of the complex balancing act that defines the economic relationship between the two neighbors? For now, the exchange has sparked a renewed conversation about agricultural policy on both sides of the border. And it has reminded everyone watching that trade disputes are rarely as simple as they appear in political headlines. Behind every argument are competing economic models, different national priorities, and millions of farmers whose livelihoods depend on the outcome. Whether this moment leads to real policy change remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. The conversation about dairy in North America just became much bigger than milk. And the debate over how countries protect their farmers is far from over. So what do you think? Should countries be allowed to protect their agricultural industries however they choose? Or should global trade agreements push for completely open markets? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping global politics and economics. Because the next chapter of this story may already be unfolding.